Did you have good lunch today?
I did.
What did you eat?
I had a chicken deluxe sandwich meal, but we gotta go have it at the Dwarf House today.
The Dwarf House. If you have not been to the Dwarf House in Atlanta, put it on the list.
Hello, and welcome to the Resilient Lineage podcast, where we reflect on the past, anticipate the future, and discover what God is up to today. Yeah, so I'm Olivia.
And I'm Milo.
Yeah.
And so we got word about visiting the Dwarf House.
From friends of ours.
Dwarf as in like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Mm-hmm. And it turns out the Dwarf House, there's been two locations. So the one we went to is the location where Truett Cathy and his brother started their restaurant business. Mm-hmm. I think it's in 1948 or something like that.
Something early. 57? Does that sound right? I saw 1957 everywhere in the store. But maybe that's when it...
Okay, so we're going to let our audience Google check that for us because we're on the road. Mm-hmm. And last week we recorded our podcast with Lori, and we just let the conversation roll. And she was gracious enough for us just to kind of pick her brain and
go into her house, have dinner with her.
She had us over for dinner. My folks were there. Bethany, my mom,
brother.
Yeah, your brother was there, and so it was a great time as a family catching up. And then she was gracious enough to have us do a podcast with her, do a sit down episode.
We had a live audience.
Yeah, Lori. If you haven't listened to the previous episode, go back and listen to that because we're going to continue our conversation with her. And this is not the format we typically do. Mm-mm. We usually sit down with a passage of scripture or a topic, and we sort of talk through that in some very clear action points and steps and ways we can kind of integrate God's truths into our life. But this was more of a podcast of sitting down with a family member who is also in ministry, who has lived a very deep and passionate call of God upon their life and has accomplished very significant things for God's kingdom. And so it was a chance to have a conversation with Lori from the vantage point that you might not hear in other places. Like these aren't the type of questions she's been on, Focus on the Family, and she's been on a lot of other Christian radio stations. She's spoken at, big venues all over the world. She's spoken on leadership and all kinds of stuff. And so the conversation we wanted to have with her was one that was more along the lines of, kind of how do families talk about these things? Like, because we are family. Yeah. So Lori's relationship is her dad and my grandfather were brothers. My grandfather was the oldest brother in the family. And then her dad was a bit younger. And so... they lived up in Washington State. We lived down in Oregon, so we would see her occasionally. That side of the family, maybe once or twice a year. And Laura's, a little bit older than us, a little bit further up the road. But she's had an incredible career. So if you visit our website, thisresilientsoul.com, one of the things you're going to find is for this particular episode, if you click the link for the show notes, I'm listing links for all of her information. So she leads a ministry now called Wild Women of God. She led a ministry in the past, just retired or didn't retire, but she stepped down as president. She's still on the board. But she started an organization called Teach One to Lead One 28 years ago.
And that's been phenomenal here.
Yeah, it's been a massive impact in the public school system on teaching biblical character traits in the public school system specifically. I'm going to have a link to Amazon with a list of her books. So I'm even putting in some YouTube videos of her preaching. So if you really want more of what she is and what she's about, I encourage you to click on that link for the show notes. And if you're using your podcast player, when you see the show notes, it'll say click here for show notes. Click that button and it'll take you to our website, to this specific episode, for you to be able to get more of that information. So do you want to say anything else before we hit play?
No, just go for it.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Yeah, that's a really...
But Cousin Milo, that voice is in your life. When you read that, you find the transferable trials or the transferable things that have helped. That's a voice in your life now, a voice that can fortify I guess we were talking about families, but fortify the culture of who you are, so that when you come back to your family, you bring that with you. You bring those voices, that fortification. When you go to your family of origin, you bring that with you.
Yeah. And sometimes it'll be received.
And sometimes not.
And sometimes not. And I think that's where, and maybe this is a good place to, sort of pivot to. Because as you bring on these things, for some folks, well, for all of us, it's going to feel new at the time. And sometimes new things are fun things because they're oftentimes novel. But it can also be a little scary because they may also be untested in my life. I could see them untested in other people's lives, but they're untested in my life. And so as a result of that, there's this breakdown we do for when there was a training I used to do on how to cultivate spiritual toughness. I spent a year in the Navy traveling around the world, how do you working with Navy leadership, spiritual toughness. One of the things we talked about was, if you look at people's decisions, if you want to change your decisions, you've got to change your convictions. And if you want to change your convictions, you've got to get down to, well, what are the values and beliefs that I'm operating off of? And so not only do it, there's a couple ways.
Which kind of comes back to, from the value and beliefs, is your concept of God.
Right. Well, yeah, that's a huge piece of it, right? Because if I believe the Lord's in charge and he's leading my life, then it clicks up to, and this is the way I would teach the course is, okay, what are your convictions? Or another way to frame that is, what have you become convinced of?
Ooh, I like that.
Right?
That's good.
So with my, if I'm kind of onboarding some of these new ways of family culture, new ways of life priorities, I'm getting into the word, his day, his pay, his way, I'm onboarding these things, then this is exciting. It's novel. It feels new. But I'm not convinced yet because I haven't lived with it long enough. Yeah. And so there can be sort of not fragile, but sort of tenuous handle on it, because what happens when I come home with this? And we've heard these stories. Somebody comes home and says, I gave my life to the Lord. And, a family member goes like, oh, you're going to go whatever. They make fun of them and all that kind of stuff, or they tell their friends that they're going to go to church. Oh, a Jesus freak now, or whatever it is. So there's that, how do I hang on to this? So for that person that's kind of new to this, they're hearing these things, they're excited about what this stuff is, but they're not convinced yet, right? Because they haven't lived with it yet. What would you say to that person to encourage them?
I would say approach it like an adventure. Like we were talking earlier at supper about going to the Grand Canyon. I've climbed it twice, down and up. Well, what made me convinced of my backpack? What made me convinced of my shoes? Because I put myself in an adventure where it had to be tested. What if you took these things we're talking about and said, I'm going to choose an adventure?
Yeah.
I'm going to test them and see if I can have my own experience and kind of that spiritual stamina, so that it brings that strength to me, that toughness, but see it as an adventure and test it. Try it.
Yeah, well, God says, try me.
Yeah, and see.
Yeah.
See if I won't show you some things, know? Absolutely.
He'll show you. No, I was just kind of reflecting on kind of what you were saying with living with conviction, or I feel like here, maybe you guys can translate what I'm saying. These are just thoughts. But there might be people that are going to be like, through trials and tribulations, I'm going to do that. And when that happens, they're freaked out because they're not familiar with in a certain capacity. For instance, we had a guy come to our chapel who was a Turkish missionary for 22 years, planted churches in this Muslim country. And in 2016, he was falsely accused of treason and was thrown into prison. And they gave him 3 life sentences in prison. And him and his wife were both arrested. The wife got out after 2 weeks. And he was like, this is it? This is my life. And he's like, if you would have told me 2 weeks prior, I would have been like, you know what? The Lord's got me. If the Lord's presence is there, it's going to be great. I have people praying for me. If that's the will that God has for me, I'll be strong and courageous. I will not be afraid. And he's like, when I got to prison, I was strong for 24 hours. And then I was broken because he was put in isolation. So he's like, I could have slept, but the adrenaline kept me up and knocked all of my natural hormones out of balance. So now I'm like scared and petrified. And it's like, I don't have anyone there to coach me, to help me discern if I'm believing in the right thing or if I'm on the right track. And he's like, and I want to share this stuff, but I'm not fluent in the language enough to communicate these things. And then so I say all that to say, like, sure. So let me say this. His whole thing was, God's going to put you in situations when you're breaking these things in just to a point where it could break you, but are you choosing to get broken or not? Are you choosing to let go of God in this situation because it's hard? And are you going to like die in this valley, or are you going to persevere and be like, you know what, God, this is my life. This is what I'm called to do right now. And he's like, God will offend you. There's going to be multiple times. God is kind. Jesus is kind, but he's not always nice. So what are you going to do when God offends you? Are you going to pursue humility? Going to be able to learn? Are you going to have a teachable, a approach to him so that he can lead you?
You know, Olivia, that reminds me of a quote that Brad and Kathy Bright said to me, and that is, going back to our concept of God, does our concept of God help us with our circumstances, the way we view our circumstances, or do our circumstances impact the way we view God? Which one is it first? And what I hear from this missionary is his concept of God, he had to say, how do I translate this circumstance? Rather than this circumstance means this is true of God, rather than go to the truth of God to look at your circumstances. And I really thought about that this whole idea of concept of God is big on it, because I've read Knowledge of the Holy many times, but it's just that growth of, like you said, how do we test these things and make them practical and approach it like an adventure. Now, being in prison is not, my husband right now is going across the border to the country of his origin, and it was tested today because it was very dangerous. But he got on the other side, and he was convinced that if you will step into the water, God will part them. But until you take that step, you won't know. Until that guy was in prison, he wouldn't know. Until we're in this circumstance that breaks us and sees God come forth, we won't know.
Yeah.
I think too, I think it's obviously times of difficulty and trial, is that purifying piece. One of the things that I found too is, and I think sometimes I wonder if this requires more faith, which is when the Lord has put me in a place and is not difficult and it is not trying, but it is not exciting either. It's incredibly mundane. Like there's a story, I think it was Samuel Bringle. Do you know that name? He was a Salvation Army preacher.
Okay.
Back in the 1800s. And I was reading his biography and there's this story. He's this incredibly educated, phenomenal preacher. One of these ministers that people go, that's the next generation. We're going to be okay, right? So he goes to this Salvation Army post, and he gets there, and he's expected to be giving these responsibilities that will really leverage his gifts and talents and his education and, help the ministry advance. And instead, they give him the task of blackening shoes in the basement of the facility. Now, when I read that, to be honest with you, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what blackening shoes meant. So I read this whole chapter, and when I went to my professor, because it was for a reading assignment, I said, I don't know what this blackening shoes is. She says, oh, well, back in the day, leather shoes would come out, and they wouldn't be black necessarily. So somebody would have to take dye to them and blacken them. Oh, so his job was to sit in the bowels of this building away from everyone and blacken these shoes. And it was in that place that the Lord was able to arrest a soul and go, will you be faithful to me here?
In the mundane.
In the mundane, in the invisible, in the unnoticed, in the underappreciated, in all of that, will you still do this with excellence because it is unto me? Will you still do this with an attitude of gratefulness
and humility,
a posture of humility, and all of these sort of things? And if I remember right in that book, he very much treats that as a deeply formative experience for him. But for most folks, it would be like, okay, well, that was that
Be
was
like, when can I clock out?
Yeah.
When can I go read my Bible
Yeah.
on my couch?
which I remember when I read that, thinking, where are those places in our lives that we try to truncate? We try to make them as short as possible because that doesn't, for the missionary that has to do that, doesn't make very, very good monthly update newsletter. Do you know what I mean? It's not a great thing. You're like, hey, what'd you do this week? Well, here's the thing I did. Didn't you do that last week and the week before that? Yep, that's what I like. But there becomes a sacred place of encountering the Lord and Him sort of reworking the things that are in our souls that then, I'll say this, have to be reworked for us to step into the ministry He has for us in a sustainable way.
Ooh, I like that. And that's a spiritual toughness.
That is a spiritual toughness. Because if those things are not worked in the bowels of a facility, doing something mundane where it's unnoticed and underappreciated, but nonetheless, I do it as faithfulness unto the Lord. If I can figure that out there, then there will come that time when I may have the crowd in front of me and all the applause. And what's my objective? I don't care. Was this faithful unto the Lord? Or I only had 5 people show up for my meeting. Okay. Was this faithful unto the Lord? It sort of puts that cultural ethos into the fiber of a soul.
Well, and Cousin Milo, it sounds like worship. How does blackening shoes become an act of worship? Yeah. It's unto the Lord.
Yeah.
That could be for anything we do. When we do anything unto the Lord, is that not an act of worship?
Well, there's a brother in Lawrence, right? Practicing the presence of
when he's in the clanging pots in the kitchen. But it's an act of worship unto the Lord. And I think what we think of this ethos is we go to church and that's where we worship.
Yeah.
And He said, no, I want it in the brokenness or in the mundane, because He's developing that stamina. Because when we do get on that stage or when we get the big applause or whatever that might be, we're not spoiled by it. We're not injured by it because we have developed something that's so much deeper than that.
Let's talk about the ministry you're doing now.
Okay.
Because you've shifted recently.
I have. And this just goes right along with it. It's just after 28 years of nonprofit work with Teach One to Lead One in the public schools, juvenile courts, I just felt a release. And it was time to hand the reins over. And now we're doing Maldonado Marvel coaching and consulting because in this stage of our journey, the knowledge that we have accumulated, the experience and the wisdom, this is the time now to give it back out. And the greatest thing I do now is through others. And so if it's on a stage, it will be in order to help find those people who want something more than where they are right now. And so it's an exciting place to be because it's that second half.
Yeah.
And it's the infusing into the Olivias of the world. And looking at you, Olivia, is just so encouraging because in my line of work, what can I do that will encourage you in your journey, inspire you, infuse in you that courage to endure brokenness, to go forward and see everything as an act of worship, and maybe somewhere in all of it, just say, "Hey, Olivia, if you honor God's day, honor God's way, and honor God's pay, it won't serve you wrong. It'll bear fruit for you." Which is what was handed down to me. I can hand down to you, but this season, Cousin Milo, is really truly the most significant thing is through others, and I'm a coach, and I coach people, and then I also consult.
Are you? What part of you, if you're okay sharing this, what part of you is excited about this? There's always the mixed emotions when you're stepping away from a season and into a new season, right? There's that sense of appreciation for what's been accomplished over the last 28 years. The stuff I've been following online, it sounds like you found a phenomenal successor to take the reins at Teach One to Lead One. So you're very confident in the team that's there and the great work that they're going to continue doing. Nonetheless, there's a little bit of a pivot, right? Of like affections and heart, and okay, how have you found the Lord meeting you in that place of transitioning? Because I could see it, and feel free to push against this, but I could see how in some ways it could be easy to turn this new coaching. I'm going to turn this to folks as a way to just move on to something else without like reflecting, or do you know what I mean? Because it seems like it could be something that informs that process, or it could be something that helps you escape from that process. Does that?
I love that question, and I'll tell you exactly what I did. For me, this was what I did, is because that transition was very tender emotionally, even though we had the great leader and the team was going forward, and I was actually excited, but also kind of like, I hope I don't mess this up, because I'm the mama of the nonprofit. So this is what I did to do the reflection and the journaling and the thinking. On December 27th of 2023 and all through 2024, maybe missed 4 or 5 days in that year, but every day from 4:30 to 7:30, I would go to Starbucks and I would reflect, I would journal, and I asked the Lord this question: what are you saying to me? And then how am I doing? And the reason why the 4:30 to 7:30, first of all, I couldn't believe they were open that early. But
I know.
I was the only one there. And the reason why I went to Starbucks is I couldn't do anything else. If I'm home, I'll figure out something else to do. But I found a place where I could just be, no one's there. And I did that every day. And that one space carved out was God's way of saying, I need your attention. And I want you to feel this, see it, understand it. And it's not next, it's not that at all. And so I don't know how many hours that equals, but I have journals. And when I was upset or when I felt like it wasn't right or whatever, but I had that space carved out. And it was one of the greatest gifts that I believe the Lord gave me. I gave myself. Because I know with my personality, I could have messed it up really bad because the ego is there. You know, you're the mother who birthed this nonprofit. Now you got another person coming in and they do things differently. It's those 3 hours in the morning. And I would say to anyone listening, it doesn't have to be 3 hours. It doesn't have to be at 4:30 in the morning, but somewhere carve out in that day where you're in the posture of listening. Lord, what are you saying to me? And our God speaks. And we were designed to hear him. And it comes in different forms, but I think that's how I did it. And so when people say, are you depressed? Are you sad? Are you hurt? Are you this? It was a year-long process for me, and it was intentional, on purpose. And my husband said, are you seriously going to do this? And I said, absolutely, every day. Every day I'll do it. The only time I didn't do it is when we were on vacation or we went somewhere else. But it was Saturday and Sunday, too, 7 days a week, because I thought if I don't spend this time reflecting and journaling and listening, I will, literally, not meaning to, but I'll mess it up because there's too much invested. And it requires an unselfishness, and I'm selfish. So I need God to help me on that. And solitude is a precious gift. It's a precious gift. It can be 3 minutes. It can be 30 minutes. It can be 3 hours.
Had you ever done anything like that before?
Not that consistently. Yeah, I've always had my prayer time every day, but not something that carved out 3 hours. And you may ask, why the 3 hours? It was enough to go deep. And it could get boring at times, like, oh my goodness. But it's just listening and hearing. And I think for me, it was that sacred Brother Lawrence time.
Yeah.
It was that time of worship.
You know, it's on the ships, everybody stands a watch for some period of time. And in a lot of the engineering spaces, there will be these watches where they have to go around the ship and check valves and pressure gauges and all kinds of stuff. And I'm thinking of engineering spaces particularly because there will be sailors that will, you know, they take up the watch and they have to spend the next 3 hours. They go to this station, they check those valves, they check those, you know, pressure meters, or like they look at all of the instrumentation and they make note of where everything is. Then they go to the next one and they make note of everything is. And probably 90% of the time, do you know how much changed between that watch and the previous watch?
Not very
Nothing.
much. Yeah. But
when something will go wrong, when something goes wrong, it's immediately noticed because the overall command has put that into the battle rhythm. Do you know what I mean?
I love that, yeah.
Where they are consistently going around, and so they can go, well, we know it wasn't an issue 4 hours ago, but now it's an issue. And so they're able to kind of shorten the period of what damage may be caused from it, or if something, is it a bad valve? Is it a bad, is the equipment failing? Is there, is there something related to the lubricants that needs to be looked at? You could chase down whatever the problems are, but you're able to quickly identify where potential problems are and get after them quickly. And I think there's, what's fascinating is, there's this thing they talk about in the military called gun decking. Have you ever heard of that?
I've not.
Gun decking is when you make up your numbers. And it actually historically comes from the period where up in the bridge of a ship, the navigation will track all of the coordinate or all of the movements of the ship. So if the officer of the deck says, right degree rudder to, whatever, they record all of that. So that it goes into a log, and then actually on every U.S. Navy ship, that log gets filed into the Library of Congress, or it goes somewhere in Washington, not Library of Congress. Okay, so it's a formal reading. Well, back in the day, this is like sailing ships. What happened is the quartermasters wouldn't track the numbers because it's really tedious work. But what they do is they would take their logbook down to the gun deck. And because they knew where they were at, they knew where they were started on their watch, so they would just make up the numbers in between. But it's not the actual. It might not be the actual movement of the ship. And so one of the things that you'll hear in the Navy constantly is, hey, don't gun deck your numbers. In other words, just because you think everything is fine,
right,
doesn't mean it is fine.
Yeah.
So what are you doing to intentionally go around? And in some ways, there's probably healthy practices of going, what are those interiors of the soul? The Lord is going, here's your route.
Yeah.
That I want to walk you through right now.
Yeah.
And I want you to learn to listen to my voice and go, there's a little bit too much pressure here. Or there's not enough pressure here.
Or not enough alignment.
Or not enough alignment. And we need to do, there's a work I want to do in this area. And because it was fine yesterday, the amount of correction is probably pretty minimal for what needs to happen today, right? Versus if I just go, well, I only do that when I go to a men's retreat or women's retreat once a year.
Exactly.
Which is like, well, that's not enough.
I love that illustration.
When you did this practice, did you know what your next step was going to be yet? Like, did you know you were going to go into mentoring and...
Not really, not fully. Part of that listening is how do I let go, and then what do I grab onto?
Yeah.
And I think that whole idea, like you were saying, is that alignment. But it was also a precious time of just being. It's not even just what I need to do or what I need to plan. It was the essence of the isness. Is where is my isness? Where is the essence of who I am right now? What's the culture of me personally?
Yeah.
And if there and jealousies or disappointments or fear, those little, I call them monkeys in the brain, they can show up and like, where did you come from? But if you have that consistent application of a posture of humility, a posture of listening, and saying, God, what are you saying? I think it was in that process, Olivia, that it just began to, where is the momentum right now? Where is God working? I'm going to join him in that. And he can change that in a heartbeat. In both Jose, my husband, and I, we're saying, you know what? This is where we see you working. This is where the momentum is. Just know we're fully available anywhere, anytime, anyone, anything. And that's the prayer. And so at the same time, Olivia, I saw people your age at Starbucks at 4:30 in the morning. They go, what are you doing over there in that corner? And I said, well, if you really want to know on your break, come over and I'll share it with you. But I developed friendships with the people there, and it was a ministry. In my waiting and in my listening were these 3 or 4, 5, 20-somethings that then became my friends. And I don't know. I just think that's a dynamic I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
And it was that your age group that is where my heart is. And yet now I'm working with another age group. So I don't know how God will work all that out. So I don't have all the answers. But what we did, what Jose and I are doing is, where's the momentum? Where is he working? Let's join him there, and he can shift it at any time. So still the posture of listening, anytime, anywhere, anything, anyone. That's my thing. And Lord, but then what if it's blackening shoes in the belly of a building? It's like, oh, I don't want that thing. That takes.
It's like, Lord, give me a place, and He's like, here's the place, and you're like, well, hang on.
Well, and actually, just talking about this has really been helpful, cousin Olivia and Milo, because that could happen. Because I'm used to more of a public ministry and expression of my gifts, but what if it is more private? What if it's on a computer helping others be that, whatever it is? Yeah. So this has been very helpful for me, so thank you.
Years ago, there was I had a prof, Tom Lorimer, massive mentor of mine when I was going through Bible college, and I remember distinctly him preaching a sermon one time, which even now that as I think about it, it's one of those things that you ever have those sermons that you still go like, oh. He was talking about what does it mean to declare Christ as Lord. And one of his points was, we often focus on the part, Lord, you can use me however
you see fit.
But then there's also this place where, but also, Lord, you can dispose of me how you see fit.
That's a harder one.
That's the hard one. That's the hard one. Because I think when we go, use me, oh yeah, use me in a great way. We come up with these, particularly those that are gifted with,
vision.
Those of us with overactive imaginations, maybe, we can imagine these things. But then there's this piece of where the Lord's going like, no, what if I don't have that for you? Will you still, in some ways it is that Jesus looking, unless you eat of my flesh, drink of my blood, you can have no part of me. And the crowds leave. And Jesus looks at his disciples and said, well, are you going to leave too? And, am I at that place in my walk with the Lord? And, this kind of maybe threads a lot of things together. Maybe it's a good thing to wrap up on. But coming to that place with the Lord of where I'm maybe new in my faith, or I've been doing this for a while, or maybe I've been trying to find the autopilot button in my walk with the Lord, and I can't quite find it because it turns out it doesn't exist, right?
Exactly.
That there's these things that I need to get to that place today where I go, to whom else would I go? Right? That this is, you're the ones with the words of life. Like, am I at that place? Or do I still think there might be a better gig out there somewhere else?
Yeah. Because Jesus could have, if I were Jesus, I would have been like, wait, hang on, let me say my piece.
Because thousands walked away.
Thousands left. And it's like, if you just stayed 30 more seconds, he would have revealed to you everything that he meant by that. And it's like, I don't want to pray the prayer that's like, Lord, where have I done that? Because on a dime, he'll bring up memories and you're like, I didn't want to know that.
Yeah.
But to just kind of add to what you're saying, will I be that obedient? Will I still be in that place of humility? Will I still be able to learn from this? Am I being the servant that you're calling me to be, even if I don't know what's going on around me?
Because it's all about Jesus.
It's
him. It's not it. And what a different level of maturity, even for the new person in this journey, they can still taste of that.
Thanks for doing this today.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
I love this.
Thank you. Thank you. I want you to come back. Let's do it again.
Okay. We'll just move. I'll go down to the basement.
Do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. So if you guys like this, share it with someone because I'll be sharing this with my friends. You can share, follow, rate, and review this podcast. We have an email at This Resilient Soul. I don't remember the email.
Hello at thisresilientsoul.com.
See what he said.
You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, and just look up Milo Curtis. You can message me through those platforms if you like.
You can find me at Olivia Curtis on Facebook and olivia.grace_28 on Instagram.
How do you want people to follow up with you?
Yeah.
Well, it's Lori Maldonado on Facebook.
Okay.
Yep.
They can find you there?
Yep.
All right.
wildwinmygod.com.
We'll provide those links in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys.
Well, I hope you guys all have a wonderful week. and that you enjoyed something very special out of it.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.